Geek. Talking baseball every week. Because they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the Payroll and Free Agent Edition. We thought it was just going to be the Free Agent Edition, the free agent edition. But now it's the Payroll and Free Agent Edition, yeah. Mr. Gleeman of The Athletic.
Who are you?
I am John Bonus of Twins Daily.
I've been wanting to meet you. That's nice that you showed up.
Yeah. I've got a good story on the Payroll on Twins Daily today.
I read it this morning. I read it. Because I support John's writing work.
That's
unlike
right.
John with my writing work.
Right.
We were planning, so on the Patreon podcast, which is Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman, we use that for a lot of things, but one of the main ones is just like deeper dives. And we've done the past two shows.
Right.
One, we did an entire show about free agent starting pitchers, and then we did an entire show about free agent hitters.
Right.
Could make sense for the Twins.
Combined to that is 3 hours worth of
it's
deep
literally
dives into
3.5
probably
hours.
45, 50
Something like that, yeah. A lot.
free agent targets.
And we spent a lot of time talking about center fielders and right-handed bats and starting pitchers and sort of bench players, that sort of thing. What the areas of either weakness for the Twins or just kind of what they would prioritize having to fill this offseason. We're going to talk a little bit, our plan at least for this show, as of
to try and
24 hours ago,
try and summarize
was
that.
to kind of take those 3 hours of in-depth player-by-player scouting reports and all that stuff and our opinions on each one and, fit it into a half hour. Maybe a little more than that. But, and if you want more, they're available, by the way, for free. The entire archive on Patreon is free to anybody who signs up.
You just sign up and you start paying $1 an episode going forward, and you get all the archives for absolutely free.
But then last night, Dan Hayes and Bobby Nightingale, who was just on the show as a guest, were in Arizona for what are called the general managers meeting, the GM meetings, which is sort of always at the beginning of the offseason, and it really is more of like people inside baseball. There's some media that cover it, those two, for instance. Yeah. But it's different than the winter meetings, which is more of like a media event where there are actual like press conference and stuff. This is just all the front office guys are in one spot. So some media members show up to interview them. So Dan, I just read his article about it, kind of confirmed and got some quotes from Derek Falvey.
Something that we had hinted about in the Patreon a few days ago.
This has been, that's exactly right. And also just has been discussed for several months, really the past year, once the local television chaos started with Bally Sports and Diamond Sports Group and all that, and the Twins deal was expiring and there was bankruptcy by the broadcasters end and all that. And we've been speculating now since the season ended, certainly a lot, about what they were making $55 million a year from Bally Sports to broadcast their games locally. That contract is up, and even if it weren't up, there's a bankruptcy involved that would make the likelihood of them receiving $55 million in 2024
a bankruptcy with the television network.
Yes, not the Twins. Highly unlikely. And so what we've tried to speculate when we talk payroll and free agency and roster decisions, which there's been a few of those, which we're going to get to too, is, well, what type of impact will that have? And it's difficult to, kind of get a grasp on it because it's like, well, they're not going to make $55 million from TV, but are they going to make 40, 20, 0? What's they don't know. And so we certainly
And how much of it are they going to cut? Because one of the things we talked about in the offseason handbook, Twins Daily's offseason handbook, I wrote, not only is the default assumption is that generally a little over 50% of revenues end up go to the opening day payroll, right? And so if you're losing $55 million, well, that means that payroll could come down to like $30 million. But it's even actually worse than that, is that it's a lot easier to cut $25 million from opening day payroll than it is to cut $25 million from the rest of your organization, for the rest of that, right? So if you take care of 30 off of the opening day payroll and you decide, you know what, I don't know where I'm cutting $25 million out of jobs that for people that are making $50,000 to $80,000 a year. I don't know how I'm cutting $25 million from that, right? It's a lot easier to just say, well, how about we not sign that free agent, or how about we trade away, 2 of these guys, right? And see what we can get back in prospects. So the question was, it wasn't just maybe 30 million was at stake. It was maybe whole 55 million. Like there was some amount that was
that's
at stake.
That's not why it's a 50% figure. It's not that they're spending the other 50% on $80,000 employees a year. It's that they're taking some of that as profit.
Some of that is profit. You are correct.
Yes, or operating whatever capital.
Absolutely.
But I get what you're saying. I think that's true. But realistically, our hope, I think, that we kind of expressed was we would like to. This is a very legit worry or just a logical reason why the payroll would go down.
Right.
If let's say they end up signing, and I would view this as somewhat optimistic at this point, a deal that gets them $30 million a year,
right,
or at least for next year. And I think that would be a good outcome for them at this stage of the game.
Right.
Well, you've lost $25 million in revenue. You would expect that to equal somewhere between $10 and $15 million in dropped payroll.
Right.
That's pretty straightforward. I know no one wants to hear that, but that's just math there, basically. The argument we made, or at least I made, I think you mostly agreed over the last several weeks, was even if that's the case, I felt, and look, it's easy to spend other people's money. It's very easy to spend a billionaire's other people's money.
Yes.
But to me, given where this fan morale or season ticket base or however you want to view it was
just a competitive window.
Yes, but where it was 3 to 4 years ago,
right,
or 4 or 5 years ago, I guess,
right,
and where it is right now today, or at least yesterday, coming off the first playoff victory in 20 years, first playoff series victory in 20 plus years. I think the second half brought back some fans who had kind of checked out. I think the playoffs were a lot of fun. All that stuff. We see it in our numbers.
Right.
There was value beyond just kind of the X's and O's here in saying, yes, we have 25 million, let's say, in less revenue. Instead of dropping the payroll by a amount that will kind of cancel that or wipe that slate clean, what if we just take a $15 million loss beyond what we were planning for this year? And again, it's easy to spend other people's money, but I will say that $15 million or even $25 million is less than 1% of the net worth of the people running the Twins, the Pohlad family. And the Twins are not their biggest business. The Twins are not their biggest source of revenue.
Sure.
And within that, the Twins themselves, the entity that is the Minnesota Twins, which Carl Pohlad, now the grandfather of the people in charge now, essentially, purchased for under $50 million in the 80s, is now realistically probably worth $2 billion.
Sure.
And so to take a $20 million loss in 1 year or even every year when the asset is appreciating by that extent. Now, there's difference between an asset appreciating and liquid capital, but I will say this. They have plenty of liquid capital to deal with a $15 or $20 million outlay beyond what they were hoping, even if it's almost guaranteed to put them further into the red. I think people don't quite, take your phone out and try to calculate what percentage of $1 billion $20 million is. Right. Your phone's going to give you a real weird answer because there's not even that many characters on there. And so I think those are all factors, and I mention them at the top here because I absolutely think that is where anybody who hears about a lowering payroll and revenue and this entire situation, that is, and I would say rightfully, where an average Twins fan's mind should and will go. But
I think that's almost. I honestly think that is deeper than most Twins fans' minds will go. Because here's what I think Twins fans might go. They've been like this for 60 years. It's the same old thing.
Well, it is.
No, that's what I'm saying. One of my points in today's story is this has been the cheapness of the owner for the Minnesota Twins has been the number one most single damaging narrative throughout the history of this franchise going on 60 plus years. Yeah. It is the one thing
through ownership groups, by the way.
It is the one
cross ownership groups.
Cross ownership groups. 60 years, right? And multiple management groups.
Yeah.
It is the one thing, honestly, I don't know if even if you did overspend for years, right, that is going to be attached to this franchise regardless. But in a off season where you are trying to market your team as a
On the rise,
on the
ascending.
rise, and
Broke the curse, all this stuff.
and in a competitive cycle in which you often overinvest during this part of a competitive cycle, you underinvest when you're going to be crappy.
Which,
either
by the
way.
way, they did.
Right? Yeah,
They wildly underinvested in the team for almost half a decade.
right, exactly right. I don't think that there is going to be a deeper thought process. It's just going to be same old Twins and shut down,
Right.
and turn the power off,
Right.
And they're doing that just as things were about to heat up.
Yes, you're cutting yourself off at the knees. And so I get all that.
Right.
And so that's kind of why I feel like, and again, it's easy to spend someone else's money. But what we're talking about here is the equivalent of, a normal person spending a couple of $1,000s basically. And I know that they'll tell you, and I'm sure I'll hear from Twins officials on this. Anytime we talk payroll, we hear from them. I think they are missing. So anyway, Dan Hayes got some quotes from Derek Falvey, but also did some digging beyond Derek Falvey and reported that the expectation is that the Twins payroll will definitely be dropping in 2024. Right. It was roughly $155 million this past season. And the expectation, it sounds like, is that it could be as low as 125 and kind of as high as 140.
Right.
That's a lot. I mean, that is a big drop-off. That is a drop-off of 10% minimally and basically 20%.
And really the key to why that's such a big drop-off, when we say a big drop-off, is that just taking a look at sort of their default easy decisions on sort of...
If they just kind of ran it back.
If they ran it back and just brought back all the guys that are absolute bargains.
Yes, not
right?
Sonny Gray
right.
or even Michael A.
Committed
Taylor.
money, right, yeah. Just the guys that are absolute bargains.
Yes.
Well, you write about 115, 120 million, right? So really what you're talking about is a difference in being able to spend, well, you thought you were going to be able to spend maybe $35 to $40 million on that, maybe $50 million on that.
Potentially
things.
not being able to spend at all.
You're not able to spend 5 to,
which is
5 to
nothing.
20, right?
The argument I make within that is...
So you get about a third as much room to spend as you did before.
I get on a just straight up, profit and loss spreadsheet. If you're losing $30 million in revenue, you would drop your payroll by 50% of that.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But the argument I would make and have made for them kind of anticipating this, because this shouldn't have snuck up on anybody who's been listening to the show or just reading whatever, is that the value of keeping fan morale high, keeping even beyond that, just sort of keeping this train rolling off a very good second half that I think was encouraging in ways that no season has been in 20 years, is worth millions of dollars in itself. And I think even beyond that, simply keeping the payroll, you could almost make it obvious to people and say, look, this is the situation. Our numbers dictate that we should be dropping the payroll by $20 million.
Right.
Guess what? We're not doing that. We're putting in another $20 million. We know we're going to take a loss. This is going to hurt our bottom line. Guess what? We believe in this team. We believe in the momentum. We love the fans who come back to Target Field. You could play it up as a positive thing instead of what will now bring this entire thing to a screeching halt from a fan morale standpoint. And I to me, okay, you're saving $15 or $20 million. How much are you losing long term? Because this is not a 1 year thing. Like you said, it's a 6-year thing that you've made some tiny incremental progress on kind of convincing some people that could be different, because they have spent quite a bit relative to the previous 55 years.
This management team, the Falvey management, if you haven't been paying attention for the last 5 years, the Falvey management team has been bold.
Right.
They have gone out and they have traded big-time prospects for big-time players. They have signed Carlos Correa to the biggest.
Right. But that has made only a small dent in the perception that was created rightfully over the past 5 to 6 decades. And so to kind of go back to that and wipe away any of that incremental progress and just put it back into the cheap poll ads, all this stuff, it becomes hard to defend. Yeah. Or I don't even want to say defend, to sort of rationalize or explain. Right. Because ultimately, if this is what happens, and it certainly sounds like that's their plan, I don't doubt Dan Hayes' reporting. Bobby Nightingale.
We heard the same thing.
Yes, we talked about it on the last show.
Right.
And you could see this coming. Like, we didn't know how. We thought
I specifically asked a couple of pointed questions
3 weeks
about
ago
payroll
or whatever it was
to Falvey back then, and he was his answers were not as optimistic as they had been in the past
Right.
about what his expectations were.
And so
How about that?
if they were to ask me, and they shouldn't or won't, but I would say to them, think long and hard about
I don't think they need to ask you.
penny
They know what
wise.
your answer's gonna
Yeah,
be.
well, you can. They're listening. Hi, everybody. Hi, guys. John put me up to this. He's the troublemaker.
That's right.
But I would think long and hard about the old penny wise, pound foolish idea, which is you're saving, quote unquote, $20 million this year if you drop the payroll from 155 to 135, let's say. But I feel pretty strongly that you are at minimum eating through most of that savings in sort of big picture lost fan interest and
revenue, yeah.
future revenue. And I think there's a pretty decent case that you're going to end up losing much more than the 20 million over the course of the next 5 to 10 or 60 years, just to halt this momentum. Now, look, if they just put a $135 million team on the field next year and they win the division title and they make a playoff run, nobody's going to care how much it costs.
That is part of the temptation. Right? Part of the temptation is they've got a very solid team already in place.
Which
the
we're gonna
AL
talk
Central
about.
is really, really bad. And as a result, they could spend $125 million. They could actually cut payroll further than that. They will still be the favorite team in the to win
They
the
have
AL
a lot
Central
of young,
next year.
cheap players
Right.
who have emerged. Royce Lewis,
Right.
Wallner, Julian,
Exactly
on and
right.
on.
Right.
They have some bargain guys. They have the
They
flexibility.
have some payroll situations coming up the next year.
Right.
The things are going to get much more expensive in 2025.
But you can also view that the opposite way, which I agree with what you're saying, is that this roster specifically is built in a way that makes cutting $20 million in payroll more feasible or more palatable.
Right. Less painful than it would normally be.
For all of those same reasons,
Right.
the division is winnable. You have momentum. You got young players who are cheap. You can make the exact opposite argument, which was this is when you put pedal to the metal and put more money in.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think,
you take a look at the Texas Rangers. Take a look at the Philadelphia Phillies. That is what they did. What they did is they saw a couple of good players coming up through the ranks, and they said, "Here's when we start investing $30 million a year into some players." Right. And that is where the Texas Rangers 2 years ago were absolutely brutal. Right.
Last year they were brutal.
Right. And 2 years ago they were really brutal, but they were like, we've got a whole bunch of prospects that are ready to be here, and they went out and signed Semien and Seager.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's fans have every right to be disappointed by this news. I don't think it should shock anybody who's been paying attention, but that doesn't mean you can't be disappointed or frustrated or angry or whatever. I think certainly the Twins know what the reaction is going to be. I don't know that they know the extent of it.
No.
And that's been my feeling about them in general, which is they're not,
They seem frustrated that narrative seems to override everything.
Right.
And just so we're clear, that narrative is overplayed. Like, it absolutely is an overplayed narrative.
Right, but
but it's also a cliche. A cliche is a cliche because for a reason.
You can't put one piece of meat in the shark tank and not expect the sharks to go nuts for it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Exactly right. Yeah.
You have to go meatless. This is my worst analogy ever. But you know what I'm saying? They would claim we've spent more. We've made big signings, like you just described.
And that narrative is still around. Yeah.
Right. That narrative has only changed 2% or whatever it is.
Right.
And I sympathize with that because I do think the narrative should have changed slightly more.
Yes.
But here's, honestly, you can't give an inch on this narrative. Because if you give an inch on this narrative, if you throw one bit of chum into the water, the piranhas or the sharks or whatever go nuts for it. And rightly so, because they've been waiting for that meat and it's been delivered on an annual basis for 5 decades.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes.
And so for the Twins to say, hey, we never really got full credit for spending more. Well, first of all, their spending more was just average spending in the first place.
Right.
But I do agree with that to some extent. But you can't do that for 3 years and then drop payroll after your most successful season in 20 years and not expect the reaction to be what you've just listened to for the last 15 minutes or whatever, or worse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're going to get a lot worse.
So what it means beyond, we've talked a lot about feelings here. And, frustration and, fan morale and all that stuff. The more, to me, next step is, well, what is the tangible outcome of this? Or what does this actually mean in terms of the team on the field or the roster being constructed? And unfortunately, we started this whole diatribe by saying we plan to kind of go over free agents, and we've been doing that. But this really throws a massive amount of cold water.
Now that
on
conversation
free agency
is going
in general.
to be tilted in an entirely different way. Right? It's not that they're not going to go after these free agents, but it's that the level of free agents which they're going to be going after is going to be totally different than what we.
Right.
Well, not totally different, but. More depressing. Honestly, when it comes to free agents starting pitchers, how much did we think they were really going to invest?
No, but
anyway?
again, this reinforces the stereotypes or the kind of fallback position of frustrated fans, which is they just go bargain hunting. They get the scrap heap pitchers, the scratch and dent store, and all that. And now they've put themselves in a position. It's self-imposed.
Yes.
Whether it's logical from a profit and loss standpoint or not, where that's literally what they're going to be doing now. There could be some trades, we're going to talk about that in a moment, that free up $10 million or $20 million that could then be invested. But again, that they're so up against what their self-imposed limits are now that even freeing up $10 million doesn't mean they can go sign somebody for $20 million. It just means they can put a roster in place and not have to shed beyond that. And so I think it's
big game hunting that we have seen this front office like to do over the last few years.
Correa, Donaldson, attempts for Wheeler and Darvish, that sort of thing. I mean, that's just out the window now. There's no possibility for that unless they just really pull a rabbit out of their head. We're talking sharks, rabbits so far. What else?
A lot of meat talk today.
Yeah.
A lot of live animal talk today.
Yeah, you know me. I love hunting and killing animals. That's my thing.
Before we get into some other news, let's cover a couple of sponsors that don't
great
involve
segue.
killing animals. I don't know. I'm trying to think of where Soda Stick has any things about killing animals.
No, they have some things about gophers and wolves.
They might have some hunting stuff out there. I don't know. You never know with Soda Stick what you're going to get because you go out there and it's all limited run, limited batch stuff. I'll give you some examples. They have this great little ugly holiday sweater thing going that apparently just closed yesterday, I think, or the day before. You're not going to be able to get it. It was like a Mick Golden Light holiday sweater, and you can't get that now, I don't think.
But if you were on their email list.
You can go out there and see. Yeah, if you get on their email list so you know that stuff is available. They also just kicked out a Minnesota Wild Locker Room Collection collab, which officially kicked off this week their first shirt, the Deweys. They're available at the Hockey Lodge, but if you go to sodastickco.com, you'll see them and be redirected to them. 2 more are dropping before Christmas, so keep an eye out for more fun ones like that.
We talk about like the Tony Oliva hitting school,
right?
The I got blown out of the Metrodome. They do a lot of fun, creative, well designed, and by the way, good quality shirts. We've worn these shirts.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And it's good quality. What I always say is go to sodastickco.com, soda like Minnesota, or just Google Soda Stick. And I defy you to look over their products and not want to wear at least one of them.
And when you do that, you can, if you want to purchase something, which you're going to want to, especially for like holidays and stuff, use the promo code Gleeman and you're going to get 15% off your order. Gleeman, 50% off at sodastickco.com.
Next sponsor is HelloFresh, which you may have seen John posting his very Instagram and Twitterable photos of these meals that he's making with Chrissy.
Here's one of my favorite things to do, Aaron Gleeman.
Yeah.
We are leaving town this afternoon for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
2 weeks from the day after we get back, I have got an order from HelloFresh
scheduled to
being
arrive.
Delivered that very next day so that we don't have to scramble and run to the grocery store and figure out a bunch of stuff. It's just going to show up there and it has all the ingredients, has all the instructions, has the frozen stuff frozen, etc.
Yes.
And it makes great meals that are, like you said, Instagrammable as well. Like even more.
When you do them like John, I've also made them. They don't look quite as good. They still look better than anything I could make on my own.
And it's actually it's a fun thing to do, a fun way to spend time when you're back. Everything's all prepped for you.
It's fresh, portioned out ingredients that arrive right at your door. Whether you can customize it if you got kids, they have kid friendly. If you're a vegetarian, or if you love meat,
we got the meat and veggies options.
Okay. And if you go to hellofresh.com/GleemanFree and use the code GleemanFree, you get free breakfast for life.
Whoa.
One breakfast item per box for however long your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at hellofresh.com/GleemanFree with the code GleemanFree.
I have not tried their breakfasts.
For life. What if I live like 500 years? I probably am. You look at me. I look like
my breakfast is an apple.
Yeah, well,
I bet this is going to be better.
So yes, America's #1 meal kit. Go to hellofresh.com/GleemanFree and use the promo code Gleeman free. You'll get free breakfast for life, however long your subscription
My
lasts.
goodness.
Okay, so just to wrap up newsy stuff, they also, since we last spoke on the free show, again, we cover this stuff kind of in the moment and in more depth on the Patreon. We would love for you to join us, patreon.com/Gleeman. The no-brainer pickups of the Jorge Polanco and Max Kepler options were indeed no-brainers. That adds $20.5 million to the payroll.
Yeah. One of the things we talked about in the last Patreon episode is where those guys rank compared to the rest of the free agent market at their respective positions.
Very near the top,
which
at second base and corner outfield, which is partly why they have some trade value. We can get into that in a moment. And then yesterday they officially made or 2 days ago, officially made the qualifying offer to Sonny Gray. Again, as expected, that's a 1-year, $20.325 million deal, which Sonny Gray has until November 14th to reject or accept. He will, of course, reject it, at which point he's just a straight-up free agent. The Twins are free to negotiate with him. If/when he signs elsewhere, they would get a late first-round pick as compensation. Now, it was unlikely that they were going to pay the Piper to re-sign him at 3 years, 70-something million, let's say, or whatever. Now, with the payroll, given what we know about their likely payroll dropping, I would feel like that's not even a reasonable option.
I would suggest he is the lowest of the free agents to be offered a qualifying offer. Like, of the people, there are only like half a dozen
there
or
were
so.
Seven
who got that. And of them, I would say he's the one that is going to get paid the least on the free agent market. Would you agree with me? When I took a look at that list, that's what I thought. I don't remember the seven.
It's Shohei Ohtani, Cody Bellinger,
Right.
Aaron Nola,
Right.
Blake Snell, Josh Hader, Matt Chapman, and then Sonny Gray. In terms of where I ranked them, when I did for The Athletic, I did top 40. I had Gray ahead of Hader, who's a reliever,
I suppose that's
and
true.
Matt Chapman, who I'm just not real high on in terms of how he'll age. But it wouldn't shock me. They're both younger than Sonny Gray by 3 years, I think. So, just because of that wouldn't shock me. I think he'll get more per year than Josh
I
Hader,
agree.
probably.
I agree.
But, he's 6th or 7th out of 7. He'll reject it. We'll see.
Boy, if he accepts it, that would do something to their payroll situation.
Well, him accepting it as of 24 hours ago, I would have said that's a best case scenario for them. They pay basically market rate or maybe even a little lower on only
they're
1
at
year.
135.
Yeah, you would still take that. You
for
trade
sure.
some things to make that happen, obviously. But and then beyond those 3 things, which were all 3 expected, they added 2 players to the 40-man roster ahead of the November 14th deadline to add players to protect them from the Rule 5 draft. And so Junior Severino, who's a switch-hitting first base, third baseman, who led all of minor league baseball with 35 homers this year, and then Jair Camargo, who is a power-hitting, good-throwing catcher who ended the year at AAA, were both added. Emmanuel Rodriguez and Austin Martin and several other more prominent prospects were not added, but that doesn't mean they won't be added. That just means they still have until November 14th to add those guys. The reason that Camargo and Severino were added a week earlier than, let's say, Emmanuel Rodriguez, because he will be added to the 40-man roster, is because those two were, in addition to needing protection from the Rule 5 draft, they were minor league free agents.
Yeah.
And so if they weren't added to the 40-man roster, they would have become free agents like
The
today.
day after the World Series. Right.
And even if they were re-signed, like, for instance, last year, Camargo was also a minor league free agent, and the Twins just re-signed him to a traditional minor league contract. That then makes him eligible for the Rule 5 draft, but he wasn't chosen in the Rule 5 draft. Well, this time around, if you were to somehow talk him into just accepting a straight-up minor league contract, he's coming off a very good year at AAA. There's no doubt in my mind that a team would have selected him as just a backup catcher.
He's clearly the third depth chart person behind
he's just
Jeffers
an ideal
and
backup catcher, Major League ready. He would have been taken in the Rule 5 draft. So this kills 2 birds with 1 stone. Adding him to the 40-man roster stops them from becoming minor league free agents, and then it also protects them from the Rule 5 draft. Between now and November 14th, you will also see at least 2 and possibly 3 or 4 more prospects added, Emmanuel Rodriguez and Austin Martin being the 2 no-brainers on that front.
I'm a little surprised. I'll say it. I'm a little surprised Severino was added. I had heard a few weeks ago that they were thinking about Severino not being
two different. He's already been not added
Right, I
and
know.
undrafted in the Rule 5.
I
now
know.
he's coming off an awesome year.
Unbelievable year. I was surprised 2 weeks ago when I heard that they probably weren't going to protect him. And now I'm surprised that
Here's what else I'll say. He's a switch hitting, power hitting, strikeout, high strikeout, low batting average.
Yeah.
He's played second and third, but most likely at first baseman. If you're dropping payroll by $20 million,
Yeah, that's true.
it's a lot easier to turn center field to Austin Martin or the platoon with Alex Kirilloff at first base over to Junior Severino, or try to trade, let's say, Christian Vasquez and make Camargo the backup catcher. All those things save $5 to $10 million each by kind of turning it over to the young players. Now you don't have as much depth in that case, which was so huge for them and such a priority this season. But I think that plays a part in it too, which is, are we going to re-sign Donovan Solano or a Donovan Solano-like right-handed bat? Well, we could, but that might cost $4 million or $6 million. Could Severino fill that job for the league minimum and save us $4 or $6 million? That I think is part of it too. I also just think, does he profile as a great hitter? No, he strikes out a lot. He's not much of a defender. If you're 24 years old or whatever he is, and you, for the third straight year, have a good season and lead the minors in homers, you don't have to do that much thinking about it. It doesn't need to be deep thoughts. It can be, this guy hits the crap out of the ball. Let's just add him.
He could also, can they trade him?
Yeah, he can be traded.
They traded too.
Last year they added Casey Legamina, right-handed reliever. Sorry if I botched that. And then traded him to the Reds for Farmer 2 weeks later or something like that.
Okay.
So I think all of that, now there's, I want to say 4 spots on the 40-man roster. There's still some moves they can make to clear spots because they're going to be adding more guys. I think what this does from a payroll standpoint, a few things. One, it makes it very unlikely now, given that we know the payroll is going to drop perhaps substantially. And again, I would encourage everyone to go read Dan Hayes' article with actual quotes from Falvey and also some additional reporting on that. Or read Bonus's thing on Twins Daily, which he kind of went through some of the stuff I'm going through now. But it makes it very unlikely that Kyle Farmer would be retained for what is like a $6.5 million projected arbitration figure. That is just a luxury item you can no longer afford in a part-time backup role.
That's right. You can't spend $6.5 million on a utility player, no matter how much you love that utility player. When you've got, when you might need to spend that much on a starting center fielder.
Right. When you basically have no spending room. Again, self-imposed. I think it makes much more likely a trade of one or more of Polanco, who's making 10 and a half. Kepler, who's making 10, and then Vasquez, who's making 10 this year and 10 this upcoming season and 10 2 seasons from now. With Vasquez, you're probably going to have to eat some of the 10. But again, that's $30 million between those 3 players. 36 if you include Farmer. It's like 37 actually. Farmer, Vasquez, Kepler, Polanco. If you were to trade or all 4 of those guys, then all of a sudden you kind of have opened up the spending room that you hope to have. On the other hand, you've lost 2 of your best players, plus your backup catcher and your top utility guys. So these are I don't know. It's you never want less money to throw around. That's not. I know people will look and say, "Oh, the Arizona Diamondbacks made the play." Yeah, there's always examples of teams that the Rays have been doing it for years. The Twins, to some extent, have been doing it for 20 years, having success with middling or low-level payrolls. But it doesn't help you. No. I mean, just logically try to think of that. Why would having one less dollar to spend help you? But I will say that, like in this specific case, if you were to trade Vasquez and make Camargo the backup catcher, if you were to not sign a Michael A. Taylor or Kevin Kiermaier type in center field and were instead just to say it's Austin Martin's job or Willie Castro's job, or if you were to trade Polanco and make Julian the second baseman, you were to trade Kepler and make, whatever it is.
Wallner goes to right field and Larnach is your left.
Whatever it is. Like does that make the team better? No, not on paper. It doesn't have to make the team worse just because they're less proven and young. Right. And in fact, in some cases, like we saw last year when they finally gave opportunities to Julian and Wallner and whoever, those guys can be better.
You can certainly make a case that they would have been better served by not signing Joey Gallo last year
that's exactly
and allowing the opportunity for Wallner to get up here that much sooner.
The appeal with veteran players is the notion that they have a higher floor, that they're less likely to just completely flop. And I've never really seen a whole lot of evidence, like data on that it's true. I think Gallo is a great example. Gallo flopped.
Yes.
If a rookie would have come up, and if Wallner would have come up and hit like Gallo, 150 for 3 months, that would have been etched into everyone's mind, that every future rookie, they would have gone, well, we can't give him the job. What if he does like Wallner? The same kind of black cloud doesn't come attached to every veteran who struggles in the same way. But even if you buy into that, higher floor often will come with a lower ceiling. I think that's definitely true in terms of giving young players a chance. I mean, look,
it also gives you less depth,
right?
That's the key, right?
Especially from what we saw this year.
Now, whether or not you utilize that depth, whether or not you toss Gallo to the side when it's clear that he's not really doing what you want him to do, and want to give Wallner a chance, that's perhaps a weakness of this organization, a weak tendency of this organization. But you at least have that option. If Wallner falls flat the way Gallo fell flat, you don't have necessarily anybody to jump into that.
It's not that, like, on paper, Camargo projects to be that much worse than the version of Christian Vasquez we just saw this past season, which wasn't very good at all. It's that what happens if Camargo gets hurt or Jeffers gets hurt, then your backup or your third string catcher is someone off the depth chart, basically. It's not that Austin Martin is incapable of being a solid starting center fielder like Michael Taylor was. It'd be a different type of player. But it's that if he's not, what is your backup plan to that? Austin Martin would have been your backup plan for whatever veteran you had. And so that's it's like the domino effect of it. It's not that your kind of first unit that you trot out there is necessarily worse just because they're younger and cheaper and less proven. It's that, like, what happens if they are worse kind of snowballs, and then you just sort of run out of options there because the young guys are the depth, or at least that's how they planned it. I wonder about this too, which is obviously the Twins have all but said, they won't go into particulars, but the payroll is dropping. How many other teams will that be true for? I think quite a few. And, I read through MLB Trade Rumors always does like a top 50 free agent rankings, and they do their projections for contracts. And I've read this religiously for 10 years. I think they do an excellent job at it.
Yep.
I read through these, and I read all 50, and I looked at the projections. 45 out of the 50 I would take the under on without hesitation. So they're projecting salaries that I think in a normal circumstance would be too high. And in this circumstance, where there are going to be a half dozen teams like the Twins who are just very clearly dropping payroll, and I think another half dozen teams, because of the local television situation, who are maybe keeping it neutral. This idea that Cody Bellinger is going to get $260 million or Sonny Gray is going to get $90 million, I have a very hard time seeing that. Now, if I'm wrong, and that type of money is going to be thrown around by the other 29 teams, it puts the Twins in an even more difficult situation because a $20 million drop in payroll when everyone else is spending becomes difficult. But I kind of suspect that, yes, the Twins, if they drop $20 million from payroll, they're going to be the biggest or among the biggest year-over-year declines in spending. But I would not be surprised at all if league-wide, or at least, more than half the teams are neutral or declined spending. I think that's what we're about to see, because whether it's a team like the Twins whose deals are literally over with the television contracts, or teams that have a year or two left but can kind of see the writing on the wall that this bubble is about to really burst, this chaos is about to really hit the fan.
If not this year, next year.
I think you're going to start to see teams dial back their spending, and I guess in a way that would be good for the Twins. But within the division, it doesn't really matter because Cleveland's not going to spend. Kansas City's terrible. The White Sox are about to tear it down.
Just didn't pick up.
The Tigers maybe could spend, and I guess that would be a little scary, although they haven't necessarily spent real well.
No, they have not.
In recent years. So
last few years, one of the things we've been saying about Twins payroll in terms of, it's fair. It's not great, but it's fair.
It's been basically
17th or 18th ranked overall, right? Out of 30,
basically exactly average for 5 years now.
My question is at 125, if it gets down that low,
where does that actually rank?
Do we think that's going to end up ranking?
Yeah.
I'm guessing it is lower.
Oh, it'll be lower. I just don't think it'll be like 28th.
Yeah, You're right.
This past season, it would have been certainly in the 20s.
I think they'll still have the highest payroll in the AL
Depends
Central.
on the White Sox.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they won't drop lower than second, I bet. They still might have
yeah.
50% more spending than
for sure.
than the Guardians.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, what it really does is, in my opinion, three things. It brings to a screeching halt all this positive momentum on and off of the field that you've had, which is very difficult to put a number on, to quantify, but I have no doubt in my mind that it's worth millions upon millions of dollars. Right. It also very much limits your free agent and even to some extent trade options. It just sort of closes some doors to you. Like, you're not going to look at re-signing Sonny Gray. Even if you don't think it's likely, that's at least an option. Well, that's just not an option at this point. Or say you want to go trade for a starting pitcher who makes $18 million a year. It's just going to be so much trickier to do that.
Right.
And then the final thing it does is it forces you to consider moves like the trades we've discussed, or non-tendering Kyle Farmer, whatever it is, that you would under normal circumstance not do or not feel pressure to do.
Right.
They might have very well traded Polanco or Kepler or Farmer or Vasquez or whatever, just if they had a $200 million payroll. But this kind of puts your finger on the scale of that decision-making process.
Yeah, that's what I put in today's story. Is I basically said, going into this offseason, and this is not from sources, this is just a sense I've got, they had no desire to lose either Polanco or Kepler, right? They're not out there actively shopping Polanco or Kepler.
If they got a good offer, they'll consider it, but it's not a situation where they had to do it.
Right. Now, that I think they were going to get some good offers for them, right? And they were going to have to, and they will have to consider those offers. But this does make it a little more likely that they give that offer a little bit more consideration than they normally would.
It's hard enough, as we've seen, to make good decisions on these types of things. A guy's got 1 year left under contract or 2 years left. Should we sell him now? Should we cash him in now? Or do we think he's got more good? It's hard enough just to make the right decision straight up on those things. When there are other factors that are, like I said, kind of putting your finger on the scale of that, and you might think, honestly, the offers we're getting for Kepler or Polanco are just not that good. Let's just run it back with them. They're among our best players. Except now you say, well, if we do that, we can't afford to re-sign Michael A. Taylor, or we can't afford to sign Kenta Maeda to a 2-year, $20-something million contract. Right. Once you are putting other factors into this decision-making process, it's almost by definition going to lead to less. I don't know. You can still get the decision right, but it's lowering your odds of getting it right because it's just kind of making it murkier. It's clouding the picture, which is already a difficult enough thing to try to figure out. And so that's kind of what I feel like it's a shame for the Twins. Now, with that said, we've been talking when we thought we weren't sure the payroll was going to drop, and we've talked for weeks now about the possibility of trading some of these guys, how they have the lineup depths to maybe trade a hitter for a pitcher like they did with the rise in Pablo Lopez last year. I mean, the same things are in play that were in play before we knew this, but now there's no doubt to it. Now other teams know it, and now you can see the clear path to we got to shed payroll. We can't just make decisions based on their own merit.
I will say this. I think the number at which they chose, or the number at which it sounds like it's going to be at, was chosen so they don't have to trade away anybody.
Right. Like we said, if they just don't make any moves.
If the number was 115, 120, well, then they've got to, then you know that they've got some trades that are going to happen, right? They're going to have to shed some payroll, and it's going to be, probably one of the more beloved veterans on this team that are going to be the case. This feels like they know the aisles in which they are going to shop. They know the approximate prices in those two aisles.
Right.
They've got two big needs, right? They need a pitcher and they need a center fielder. And they think they can get a decent pitcher at about this much, and they can get a decent center fielder at about this much. And if you add those two to $115 million or $117 million, which is where they're going to be if they
at 130 roughly.
You're at about 130, 135.
Yeah.
And that's where that number is coming from.
You just have no room to kind of tinker around the margins, and even within that, you're going to be more motivated to clear some salary. Just let's say we want to sign a middle reliever, we want to sign a backup outfielder, we want to sign a whatever it is.
Yeah, I don't think that number is being driven by, listen, we need to save $30 million as much as is, listen, we need to save some money. we've got two big
Well.
needs. And here's how we're going to cover those needs.
I agree. Although the math just works out
Yeah,
too.
it does
If
work
you're
out,
going
yeah.
from 55 million in revenue to let's say 20 million in revenue,
Yeah.
you've lost 25 million. You would expect to lose, let's say, 15 million in payroll.
Yeah.
They were at 155. That drops you to like 135 to 140, which is
Sometimes it all just works out nicely.
yeah. Well, I wouldn't say nicely. Sometimes it all works out horribly. That's my motto, really, just in life in general. Okay, so
Sorry, go ahead.
we have kind of brushed past what had been the biggest Twins news of the previous week, which was Dick Bremer leaving the broadcast booth after 40 years. We're not going to get that heavy into that.
We're going to talk a little bit about that at the end of the
We'll
podcast,
talk a little bit about the end. We did about 40 minutes on that, kind of our more emotional reaction to it the next morning once we heard that news last week. Again, on the Patreon side. So we'll talk about that maybe if we have some time at the end here, obviously, but I would encourage everybody to go listen to that. Again, if you sign up for the Patreon, you can get the whole archive for free anyway. What we're going to talk about after we read our next two sponsors here is, okay, now we know the payroll is going down. How do we kind of reconfigure our thought process about free agency, like you just sort of laid out here? It doesn't mean that they don't need a center fielder, and it doesn't mean that they don't need a pitcher or right-handed bat. It just changes the scope of, or the aisle, like you say, that they would be shopping in. And so we're going to go over the free agent list sort of as we see it today versus as we might have seen it 2 days ago.
That's right. Yeah.
And what does that mean in terms of who the Twins could and should realistically be targeting? But before we get to that,
let's talk about our next sponsor. Speaking of dealing with problems, when you're trying to deal with some problems, right?
call them up and talk payroll. That'd be a really funny at betterhelp.com. They're like, what do you mean? You lost your job? No. Twins payroll went down. Oh, you have twins. They're out of work? Nope. Minnesota baseball team. But whatever your problem is, they can help you.
Yeah, and here's the thing. When you've made the decision, it's not an easy decision to talk to anybody about your problems or about what you're dealing with, what you're struggling with, right?
Yes.
And once you get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm ready to talk to a therapist about some of this. I'm ready to get some feedback and have somebody help me work through this stuff.
You don't need any barriers for entry.
Oh,
you don't need any
goodness.
speed bumps that'll stop you from getting there. If you wake up on a day and say, you know what, today feels like a good day to get some help, you can get it from BetterHelp. They can set you up with a real licensed therapist, typically within 48 to 72 hours, and they can also tailor it to what you're comfortable with. And so what I mean by that is, if you want to do a video chat, you can do a video chat. If you don't want to be on camera, you do a phone call. If you're a weirdo like me and you hate being on the phone, you can just do a live chat.
You got a weird schedule?
Yes.
They can accommodate that. You don't have to worry about whether or not you want to try a couple of different therapists. You can try that, right? All you have to do is just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched to a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge.
Visit betterhelp.com/Gleeman today. You will get 10% off your first month. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman.
And speaking of a holiday season coming up here, we are big fans, and we got an easy gift for you. It's not going to break the bank.
Yeah.
You get to be the star. Wireless earbuds are something that everybody wants because they're super convenient.
Yes, I was using them just yesterday for a couple hours. And Raycon, Raycon, Raycon offers high-quality earbuds.
Really super
at
well
a price
engineered.
point that is a lot more palatable
Right.
than some other brands. And we've both used them. John uses them to go out running because they're more comfortable in his ear than some other brands.
Absolutely.
I use them because they have very good battery life. Like if you're just on a Zoom for 2 hours, you don't have to worry about it running out. And also as a person who's not the most technologically advanced, it's very easy to pair them from Bluetooth. I find it a consistent connection with them, which is also key on these calls.
And like they do everything right, and including, by the way, sales. To get into the holiday shopping spirit a bit early, if you're somebody who's doing that, Raycon is currently offering 20% off everything on their site, with some products up to 50% off. So
go to buyraycon.com. That's BUYRAYCON. Buyraycon.
Yeah, that's not just Raycon.com. Buy Raycon.
Yes.
BUY.
Buyraycon.com/Gleeman. You will get, like John said, 20 to 50% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/Gleeman to score up to 50% off Raycon products. Buyraycon.com/Gleeman. Okay. So we've kind of shifted our mentality here. Not that we thought they were going to sign Shohei Ohtani.
I feel like we've been doing a little therapy.
And Cody, we could use it. And Cody Bellinger, couples therapy. That would be. There's a show. We record a couples therapy. Oh, gee, that might be a 10-episode. God, imagine that.
Then we would get some signups for that, boy. We
could
get some
pay for this therapy.
for that. We would get some subscribers for that.
Imagine video of that. We're on a couch, just like very awkwardly moving further and further away from each other on the couch.
Yeah.
So, I guess again, we're going to do the minutes, not hours version of this, which we've talked about. But you kind of laid it out. They need what they're losing from last year's team is not a huge amount in terms of spots. It's impactful because they're losing their reigning team MVP in Sonny Gray and Kenta Maeda, who had a lot of value, and then their starting center fielder in Michael A. Taylor. But that's really it. I mean, Donovan Solano they're losing too. But like, you need to. I think they're counting on essentially.
Joey Gallo, don't forget Joey Gallo.
Yeah. Who could forget Joey Gallo? I talked to him right before the playoff game. He was on the field taking ground ball. He was ready.
He was a good guy.
He was a joy to deal with.
Yes, he was, yes.
Off the field.
Yes.
He talked about whatever. He was pretty open with his struggles.
Yes.
He dropped a lot of F-bombs, which I like.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think they're viewing Paddock as replacing one of Gray or Maeda. And I don't mean that from like a production standpoint. I just mean from like a rotation spot standpoint. Right. Now, you could also just have Louis Varland replace the other one, and you got 5 starters.
Right.
You still have Pablo Lopez at the top. You have Paddock and Varland at the bottom.
Right.
And you have Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober. There's your 5-man rotation. Right. But again, that causes then, well, who's the next man up? Then you're already dipping into your prospects.
Correct.
I think they would like to sign sign or trade for one veteran mid-rotation starter to push Varland either to AAA or the bullpen so that he can be the next man up, so that you don't immediately have to dip into David Festa or whatever it is. They clearly, even more so, a more dire need is center field.
Right.
But even within that, this is part of us kind of trying to recalibrate how we view this. They could, again, just go with Willie Castro or Austin Martin or Deshaun Kersey or whoever, Michael Hellman, kind of platoon.
Maybe Nick Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things they could potentially do to replace Michael A. Taylor. They could also just try to re-sign Michael A. Taylor for $8 million or something like that. So those are the two biggest needs. I think then in terms of what I would have said were needs 2 days ago were a right-handed platoon bat who can play some first base, play some left field to platoon with Kirilloff or Wallner. But again, maybe Jose Miranda becomes that. Right. Maybe Junior Severino becomes that because they're trying to conserve money, basically. But the lineup is remarkably intact. And that's not even like assuming Buxton will make some big impact. But other than center field, they have an opening day lineup already in place.
Right.
And it looks an awful lot like the lineup we saw in the second half, which was quite good. I mean, it's missing Solano and it's missing a center fielder. But other than that, they have multiple options at all these spots. The rotation is a little less along those lines, but they could literally have a 5-man rotation that certainly wouldn't be bad compared to past Twins years. It just doesn't have Sonny Gray in it. So before we get to the free agents, let me just say, in-house center field options. Willie Castro. He's going to make about $3 million. He's going to be on the team already. You can just stick him in center field. I don't think they'd like to do that, but they could do that. Austin Martin finished the year at AAA. Deshaun Kersey finished the year at AAA. Michael Hellman finished the year at AAA. Am I saying those 3 guys are ready?
Andrew Stevenson still in the organization?
No, but they could re-sign him if they wanted.
I'm
not saying all 3 of those guys are going to be all-star center fielders. I'm not even saying they can sink versus swim versus sink if you throw them out there on opening day. I'm just saying if they don't have money to go sign a Kiermaier or a Michael A. Taylor or a Harrison Bader, who we're going to talk about here in a second, those are in-house options. I talked about Camargo as a potential backup catcher option.
By the way, let me just say, as far as in-house options go, if you missed this, the Twins have said it ain't going to be Royce Lewis
in center field.
Yeah. Well, a month ago
he's playing third base.
A month ago we were wondering if that might be the case. In the discussion we had now, whether or not they maybe revisit that.
I think
revisit that given this payroll cut.
And that's something I've talked about in the past, but I'm just going to be frank here. He's not fast enough to play center field anymore. Now, maybe a year removed from surgery, he will be, but he's just sort of normal fast now. He's not fast compared to center. He used to be extremely fast. Now he's just fast. I mean, he's slower than Austin Martin. He's definitely slower than Kersey. He's definitely slower than Willie Castro. You know, you need wheels in center beyond just the why mess with him.
Sure. Yeah, right.
And then first base options, we talked about Miranda, Severino. You could re-sign Solano, I'm sure, pretty cheaply. But again, if you were to trade Polanco, then all of a sudden Julian slides in at second and DH is open more. Right. Now that could just be Buxton. Right. If you were to trade Kepler.
So there are some other names that we're going to talk about other than just those two spots.
Okay. So laying all that out, to me, the kind of pie in the sky targets that I would have said coming into this offseason, which are very similar to guys I would have had at the top of my, who should the Twins target list, or if I were running the Twins, who would I target?
Yeah.
In years past, it would have been Zach Wheeler, Yu Darvish, Kevin Gausman. I was very high on a couple off seasons ago. I was also thought they could have gone after Carlos Rodon. Right. Some of these worked out brilliantly. I think I would have signed Kevin Gausman because I would have offered him more than he got, and that would have looked brilliant. But I also might have signed Carlos Rodon, and that would have looked terrible. So I'm not saying I'm right on that, but I tend to look at frontline starting pitchers who are gettable in the $100 to $150 million price range as what I would be shooting for. The Twins very much, they've tried for Wheeler and Darvish, but they have not really shown an ability or a want to spend that kind of money on free agent pitchers. Now, this offseason, there's quite a few guys like that. You have Ohtani at the top, obviously, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who I think is going to get about $200 million from somebody coming over from Japan. They weren't going to sign those guys anyway. But someone like Aaron Nola, I'm a big fan of. I ranked him higher than anybody else at The Athletic as like a 5-year, $130 million type of guy. That is so in my wheelhouse for like who I would try to target, a Gausman type guy, a Wheeler type guy at that price point. I just don't think that's feasible anymore at this stage.
I had Eduardo Rodriguez as one of those guys that I thought made some sense for the Twins.
Yes.
And I don't. So now, as of last night, I went through and took a look at our free agent list, and I gave them all a rating of 0 to 5. Like, what is the chance? How likely are they as a target? Right. How likely are they to end up signing with the Twins?
Yeah.
And all of those guys are a 1.
Yes. I mean, for that matter, Sonny Gray's in that mix too. I would say.
Yeah.
Sort of. I know you're lower on him, but he's a frontline pitcher who's going to make $20-something million a year.
I think
it's going to be a shorter contract, but there's no real path to get there if your payroll is dropping like that. So yeah, I would include Ohtani and Yamamoto. I think were out of their range regardless. I mean, realistically, all these guys were not going to get signed by the Twins. But I would say Nola, Blake Snell. You mentioned Eduardo Rodriguez, Jordan Montgomery, Sonny Gray, and then I would also maybe include Marcus Stroman, who surprised some people by opting out.
I gave him a 2.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. But those are just sort of playoff caliber. Some of those are a 1, some of those are a 2, some of those are a high-end 3, but those are playoff caliber starters who I think will get $20-something million a year for 3 to 6 year deals.
Yep.
In a lot of off seasons, I would be sitting here pounding the table saying this is they got to go sign Aaron Nola. They got to go re-sign Sonny Gray or whatever. I still think those would be smart moves given the state of the Twins. But that just seems so unrealistic from a monetary standpoint or a feasibility standpoint. And so I would just sort of wipe them off the list. And so then they were never going to sign Cody Bellinger. Right. Now they're definitely not going to sign Cody Bellinger. So you wipe all those guys away. Well, what does that leave? I might have made the case, and we discussed Rhys Hoskins quite a bit, who you're very familiar with because your wife's a Phillies fan. On the Patreon side, if you could have gotten Rhys Hoskins for 3 years, $40 million or something like that, right-handed slugging first baseman, cleanup type of hitter, that made some sense to me. Well, that's not a price point that they can really afford to bring it in at first base at this.
I would argue that if they are committed to getting a free agent center fielder and the payroll is really where it is, they aren't bringing on any other bat.
Right.
There is no other bat.
I mean, it would require a trade.
It would require a trade. Right.
So then you get into,
which could happen.
Who's the next level, like the third tier almost of free agents. Right. And even there, it's a little tricky. Yep. I mean, some of these guys might end up getting 1-year deals, like someone like a Lucas Giolito, let's say. Kevin Kiermaier would be, again, 2 days ago, he might have been my number 3 target for the Twins. Yeah.
Kevin Kiermaier is a center fielder.
Yes, a rich man's Michael Taylor, if you will. Yes. Well, he's going to be too rich of a man for the Twins, basically.
I think so.
I think. So the group that I would now kind of elevate to the wishful thinking part of a Twins list, honestly, would be like Giolito, Kiermaier, Teoscar Hernandez, even someone like maybe Maeda or Waka or Seth Lugo, who those normally would have been kind of my second tier, like, well, these are more realistic. Now, given the payroll, those might be, unrealistic options because those guys are going to get $15, $18 million a year for multiple years, and I just don't see how or why that would be the Twins' MO here.
Yeah, I've got some of those guys a little bit higher. So I'll start it with pitching, right? From a pitching standpoint, I don't know exactly where I wouldn't be shocked if they are shopping in the 9 to 12 or 9 to 13 million dollar range. That might be a little rich for their blood, right? But ultimately, what I think they're looking for is we are getting no more than like a 1-year deal. So if you think Kenta Maeda is getting a 2-year deal, well, then Kenta Maeda probably isn't one of the categories, right? But I'm not sure Kenta Maeda is going to get a 2-year deal. I think Kenta Maeda is going to get a 1-year deal. And so, therefore, 1 year, $11 million, would they go back to Kenta Maeda? Potentially. Right. I mean, he's one of the ones that I've got probably like a 4 on my list in terms of, things that are going. Giolito, I think, is probably Giolito seems to be sort of the every year we get about 2 weeks into free agents market, and somebody signs that nobody thought was going to sign a deal that early for that much, and it feels to me like it's everybody's sleeper, and I think everybody's sleeper this year is Giolito. I think that there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I think.
By the way, Eduardo Rodriguez was that 2 years ago.
Yes,
where it was like, I kind of like him as underrated. Then he got $80 million from the Tigers.
Exactly right.
Oh, well, no.
Right. And to me, it feels like Giolito's. I could be wrong about that. But otherwise, I think Giolito is a perfect fit. I think, other 1-year guys, Montes is a good fit. Severino's a good 1-year fit. Basically, I think they're kind of either looking for guys with higher upside that need to make good contracts. So they're riskier, but they have higher upside.
Coming off injuries.
Coming off injuries, they're right. On a make good contract like that. Or they're looking for like a veteran number 4 guy that's going to be a 1-year deal, like a Kyle Gibson.
Yeah, or Maeda, obviously.
Or Maeda would be another one.
Kind of a high floor, low ceiling type of guy, or a no floor, high ceiling type of guy. Those are I agree with that.
Yep. So guys that match that, in my opinion, were like I mentioned, those guys with a 1-year deal. I think Jack Flaherty is a kind of a mix of those two. An interesting play. I think Nick Martinez, who is in fact a free agent, is sort of an interesting 1-year play, or maybe even a 2-year play if they really believe in him. Matthew Boyd, Mike Lorenzen, Kyle Gibson, Seth Lugo, Wade Miley. These are all the sort of.
I think Boyd's hurt.
Is Boyd hurt? I think you're right. You're right.
But the other guys, I agree. Yep. These are all in the zone. The Maeda or roughly Maeda zone kind of.
That's right.
I agree with all that. I would guess that even that ends up being one aisle further than they're willing to shop, maybe, I guess, in this analogy. And so then what you're left with, more realistically to me, is, in center field, Taylor.
Yeah, right.
On a 1-year
Taylor's
deal.
The one I put on my list that I put a 6.
Yeah. Although I just saw a report from John Morosi for Fox or whatever that said, I forget what team he said. The Blue Jays, maybe, to replace Kiermaier. Have talked to Taylor already.
Of course.
I mean, Taylor's going to have interest because for the same reason that we're saying he'd be a very easy plug and play, run it back with him. Teams are going to go, well, he's a good defender. He's good in the clubhouse. He's got 20 homers. Why not?
We had a much longer discussion about that center field position on the Patreon episode. I just want to call that out.
We did like 20 minutes just on Kevin Kiermaier.
Kiermaier, and one of the things that came out of that was I just don't believe they're going to give any multi-year deal to a center fielder.
I agree.
So if Taylor gets a 2-year deal from somebody, and I think there's a 50% chance he does.
Or Kiermaier, which is even more likely.
I think there's a better. I think Kiermaier's out of their range.
I agree. The kind of third of 3 defense first guys like that would be Harrison Bader, who is legit Gold Glove caliber center fielder. He's 30, so he's more likely to age well than Taylor or Kiermaier, although they've both already kind of beaten Father Time at this point. But his bat has just cratered to the point that he's much worse than even Taylor.
He had a 69 OPS plus last
which
year.
is not nice. But you go back a couple years, and he was like a 110 OPS guy with some power and some speed for the Cardinals a couple years. But yeah, I mean, I guess like functionally, what does the payroll news do when we've gone over this, but I would say like the easiest way to think about it is compared to a week ago, they're not going to be shopping for Kiermaier. They might not even be shopping for Taylor. Now they might be shopping for Bader.
Yeah,
that's I think kind of where it's dropped them, which is those were the, he
was the number 5 on my list.
Good, mediocre, and poor options as a defense first 1-year center fielder or 2-year center fielder. And the first one is probably off the radar now for Kiermaier. The second one being Taylor, I think still makes sense, but might, if he costs $10 million, that's tricky. If he gets a 2-year deal, that's very tricky. Now you're kind of, Bader wouldn't be a bad fallback option. Now that might just be the guy you pursue. Right. Yeah. Or, again, you just say Castro.
Well, I think you even said on Monday's show, Bader is a step beyond where you want to go. Like you
a step lower than I would want.
He is a step lower than you wanted to go.
The gap between, in my mind, and I think Harrison Bader was a really good player 2-3 years ago, but I just wonder,
at this point, maybe instead you just go with Castro.
That's exactly right. To me, the gap, the drop off from like Taylor to Bader, if they could get Harrison Bader on a 1-year, $4 million deal or something, yeah, fine, whatever. But the gap between Michael A. Taylor and Harrison Bader is like the exact point at which I just go, yeah, we can just let Austin Martin try to win this job, or let Willie Castro keep it for 2 months and then give it to Austin Martin, or try to adjust on the fly. That to me is
he going to be that much better than Andrew Stevenson if we bring him as a minor league free agent? Right? Yeah, right. Yeah,
Kersey, whoever. I don't know, whoever. So then the other thing that I think the payroll stuff does is I had a bunch of relievers I like here: Ronaldo Lopez, Robert Stevenson, David Robertson, that type of guy. Even someone like Jordan Hicks, who I think is going to be pretty expensive. Normally, I would say I'm constantly, I can't say surprised anymore at this point, but kind of frustrated, and I've discussed this with the Twins officials, that they just don't value relievers in free agency or trades. They're just kind of willing to build the bullpen on the fly, and it ended up pretty well this year, although I would argue midseason it wasn't going particularly well. To me, someone like Reynaldo Lopez on a 2-year, maybe even a 3-year deal at $8 million a year or $10 million a year, that's the type of player I would be trying to target. I don't think the Twins would have targeted that to begin with because they've shown no inclination to do that. Right. And now that's just that's a luxury item they will not afford.
Yeah. We in the Twins Daily Offseason Handbook, we list 30 or 20 some free agent starting pitchers. We list 20 some position hitters or something that could make sense to get depending on what pieces happen. We don't even have a story on the free agent relievers anymore.
Back-to-back offseasons, they've not spent any money. Right. Joe Smith for $3 million was the most they've spent on a reliever. My worry is then that it also rules out someone like Tommy Pham or Hunter Renfroe or Adam Duvall as a platoon right-handed hitting first base, left field, right field. Because if that guy costs $6 to $8 million, which again is a perfectly reasonable price point for that role and something I would have pursued last offseason, this trade deadline, etc. I don't know that that's doable for them.
Well, I don't think it is doable for them, and I don't think it's given this payroll level. I just don't see any route to it. The only way it happens is if they end up trading Kepler, and then. Then what you're doing is getting worse to save a few $1 million and you're overpaying for a worse commodity and getting a little more right-handed in the lineup. That's the only advantage to it.
I guess what would you – we like to do over-unders here.
Okay.
I'll give you 2 different ones. One, what is the over-under salary in 2024 of the most expensive free agent they sign? You could say NA – non-applicable.
The most expensive free agent they sign.
Not total value of the contract, but the most, for instance, if they sign Michael A. Taylor for $9 million and don't sign anyone else, the answer to this question would be $9 million. Because that's what he'll make in 2024.
9 isn't a bad one. That's about where I was going to go. It comes down to if they sign a pitcher, it's going to cost them.
Right.
I don't think they're signing a hitter for $9 million. I think that the over-under what they're signing a hitter for is $6 million.
Okay.
Maybe $5.5 million. That'd be where I would set the over-under.
I would take go ahead.
Where would you take? Would you take the over on the hitter?
I would just take the over on that in general. But what were you just about to say for pitchers?
For pitchers, I would probably say 10. Man, I'm going to say 9.5.
Here's my other over-under. What is the total amount of guaranteed money across multiple years, not just 2024,
Right.
they sign free agents to this offseason, over-under? The total, in other words,
$15 million.
in other words, if Michael Taylor gets
14.5 million.
gets a 2-year, $18 million deal, that number is 18.
Yes, right.
You're saying how much?
$14.5 million.
$14.5 million. That ain't
I mean,
that's not much.
I mean, I just gave you the two over-unders. I thought on the two players. I
agree.
think they're only getting two players. That's $15 million. And I bet the under, by the way, Aaron Gleeman. I would bet the under on 14.5.
I like this new thing where you say by full name. Point of emphasis, Eric Gleeman. What if it's not me someday?
I just want to remind Twins officials.
They know. Believe me, they know. Yeah, I think those are not crazy over-unders.
What would you take? Pick as
I mean, I guess I would kind
you go?
of take the under, if only because trades become much more feasible for them in general, but
Right.
especially given
Yes.
these circumstances.
I agree with you.
You know, yeah, you might try to re-sign Michael Taylor, but if you don't, it's not like you're going to throw $6 million at some random free agent center fielder just because
I
you
mean,
need him.
if they sign just one guy, which I think I would put the over-under on free agents they sign at 1.5.
I mean, I think it's very possible they don't sign a free agent to a major league contract.
I agree.
I don't think they should take that approach, but it's not like they're racking up 8 signings usually anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a very, without knowing how they're going to approach Kepler, Polanco, Vasquez, Farmer. I mean, we have a pretty good idea how they're going to approach Farmer, but without knowing their kind of current willingness to entertain market level or maybe slightly below in terms of their perception value for those guys because of the payroll.
Right.
Like how much
more that makes that encourages them to choose an offer that they would not normally have really chosen.
If they don't trade one or more of those guys, then I don't really see them being at all active in free agency. But if they do trade one or more of those guys, then it opens up not only the playing time but the money to do it. So yeah, I don't know. Those are reasonable over-unders. I guess I don't know. We'll finish here with some Bremer talk maybe, but I would say my kind of main talking point as a recap of all the payroll stuff, because it's going to get emotions stirred up, is I think it sucks. I think it's both logical from a profit and loss standpoint and straightforward enough that people willing to put any ounce of effort can understand the reasoning behind it.
Right.
But I don't think that takes away from the notion of, for $20 million, they can make this all go away for at least a year or kick this can down the road for at least a year. And I don't care what you're going to tell me about businesses and liquidity and whatever. $20 million means nothing to the people who own the Minnesota Twins. And I think not spending that $20 million is much more hurtful to the people who care about the Minnesota Twins, who are not in that ownership group, of which there are, thousands upon thousands of them, than strictly the money being saved represents. I think you are cutting yourself off at the knees. I think you are choosing to halt all morale and momentum on and off the field, and you're doing it in the name of saving 0.4% of your net worth, a rounding error from a business standpoint. And again, I get it. They're trying to run it like a business. This is a slippery slope. If you put $20 million in and you know you're going to lose it, the next year do you want to put $40 million in? But the truth is, you could do that every year with a slippery slope for the next 50 years, and it would not affect them one bit in terms of generational wealth and liquidity and ability to do what they want to do in life and all this stuff. But what it will affect is what the average person who is your customer and is your fan thinks of the situation and their spending and their willingness to buy in. And like you mentioned at the beginning, their willingness to kind of let some of the perception of this team that has been so strongly built on a negative side over the last 60 years, let some of that be washed away with each year of success and spending. You are completely undoing that. And I wonder if you're not only getting back to the starting point, but you're almost worse now because now you've given a little taste.
Yeah, right.
And now people can say, really? They finally won a playoff game, and now they're going to cut the payroll.
Right.
And no matter the logic behind that and the profit and loss nature of that and the declining in revenue means declining in spending. There's nothing you can say or do other than putting your money up. And I just think, if someone said to me, equivalent dollars, for $1,500, you could just push this all off for a year and everyone will just be fine with a neutral payroll. That is something that the average person would jump at. And it surprises me. In some ways, it doesn't surprise me because all the stereotypical Twins cheap stuff. But it surprises me that they're not, that the thought process or the smarts involved, because they know all this stuff that we're talking about, didn't cancel out but it's going to cost us $20 million.
Yeah.
I just that there isn't someone in that room banging a table and saying all the same stuff that we've been talking about today and just saying, who are we kidding? Why do you care about $20 million? And I know it's a slippery slope, but I think unfortunately that's how a lot of people are going to take this. It's going to have a effect on the interest in the offseason. It's going to affect how the interest in season tickets. It's going to affect just the overall fan morale. And the only way now that you can cancel that out, there's no amount of trades. There's no amount of, hey, we've been average spending for this long. The only thing you can do now to cancel that out is just win and win a lot.
Yep.
And that's great. You can still do that.
Yes. Yep.
But you've
And I
increased
think
the
they will.
degree
I
of
think they
difficulty.
will. Right, yes.
I do too. But you've increased the degree of difficulty. And then even within that, what you've done is you can't prove the winning until next October.
Right.
Right? And so in the meantime, you've given people a really easy worst thing to latch onto, which is all the support in the world and all the good vibes and all the young players. And we finally won in the playoffs and now they're going to cut the payroll. What the F is that? Right. And I think that's a perfectly viable way to feel as a fan, no matter how logically or linearly you want to think. And the Twins need to realize that they open that door wide open for the fan base. And if there's a single person at Target Field in those offices that is surprised by the bucket of shit that they're about to get, sorry for cursing, from this fan base on this decision, that person should be fired because that person cannot see a foot in front of their face.
The good news is that since you're not using season tickets, you've got lots of opportunities to get tickets using the Game Time app.
This is why you're a professional, John. This is why you're the best, John.
Our sponsor, the Game Time app. The Game Time app is going to let there might have been 5,000 new season ticket holders that needed to unload some of those tickets on the Game Time app. Those aren't going to be there anymore. But now you don't have to go invest in season tickets. You can just grab some off of the Game Time app, which specializes in sort of last minute and cheaper tickets.
Or you can go hop on that Wolves bandwagon. They're spending money. They're winning games.
They certainly have tickets for the Wolves.
Yes.
They have tickets for the Wild. They have tickets for comedy shows. They have tickets for concerts. And they have tickets for the Twins.
Yes. Last minute, hard to find, specialized tickets. That's their specialty.
Right. And it's not a website.
It's just an app. You download the Game Time app.
That's right.
On your phone. You create an account and you just use the code Gleeman and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account on the Game Time app. Redeem the code GLEEMAN. You get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay. Should we finish with some Dick Bremer memories
let's do
here?
that.
So we're not going to get back into the emotional side of it that much. I think as I went on that rant just now,
well, we should mention we did 40 minutes.
Yeah, that's why
the day after. Right?
It's worth discussing. We just already discussed it a week ago. As I finished up that rant just now about how all the logic in the world doesn't change the emotional component of it.
Sure.
It reminded me a lot of the discussion we had about Bremer, which is there are a lot of people who are very upset that Dick Bremer is leaving after 40 years, and B,
it doesn't appear to be completely his decision.
Right. That is leaving before, let's put it this way, before he would have liked to have left.
Yes.
And from my perspective, I've gotten to know Dick Bremer over the last 3 or 4 years, and he's been nothing but great to me after, he once had me blocked on Twitter because I thought, it turns out that Blyleven was more to blame for this than him. But I thought the broadcast had gotten very stale at the end of his pairing with Blyleven. But I've been very impressed. I've said this to him. I've said this on the show with how he managed to raise his game in his 38th, 39th, and 40th season on the job once it was Morneau and Glenn Perkins and Trevor Plouffe instead of just Burt Blyleven.
Right.
And he took that. There's multiple ways that can go. You can just basically keep phoning it in.
Sure.
And just keep behaving as you did with Blyleven when you knew everything Blyleven was going to say at every point in the game. Or you can take it as an opportunity to say, you know what? I got these young guys in the booth. I haven't heard all their stories. I don't know what they're going to say.
I'm going to mentor them on how to do this, and they're going to mentor me on some finer points of baseball.
And I will give Dick Bremer a ton of credit as a near 70-year-old guy who's been doing this for 4 decades to have adjusted to that. And I think the broadcast was better than ever.
Yes.
And he's the biggest part of all broadcasts and has been for 40 years.
I think he was at the top of his game.
Yeah. Yes. With that said, similar to when they let Blyleven go before he wanted to go, it doesn't always line up that someone wants to leave the job at the exact moment the job wants them to leave. And I think there's absolutely reason to be upset with or criticize the Twins in how they handled this, in that he didn't get a proper send-off. He didn't get, that final game. Everyone knows he's leaving and they can give him a standing ovation. There was a little of that. They gave him a cake for the 40th year and all that stuff. But the notion that he was leaving was certainly not known at that point. But I will say that it takes 2 to do that tango.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't do a send-off for a guy who doesn't want to be sent off. You know what I mean?
That's right.
It's like at the Academy Awards, they start playing that music 30 seconds into someone's speech. Yeah. Some people just keep giving their speech.
Right. Right.
And so they have every right, much like with Blyleven, to think that the broadcast would benefit from a fresh voice after 40 years. I mean, that's an incredible run. And I think there's a tendency, because of guys like Vince Scully or whatever, to go, well, once you make it to 40 years, you get to just do it for however long you want. But that's not how this works. And the broadcast absolutely got better, or at the very minimum refreshed.
Yes.
Replacing Blyleven after however many years he did with a newer, younger, fresher look. And I'm not saying that you need to upgrade in terms of performance from Dick Bremer.
Right.
Like we just said, he was doing a fine job. But you are allowed, after 40 years, to say, we'd like to bring in the next person who can be a long-term voice of the Twins. And those opportunities don't exist if you don't make this change. And so if you're an upset Twins fan about this, and you're upset about the way this was carried out and that he didn't get this send-off, I think that's valid. I also think Bremer himself made that somewhat difficult, it seems like. But if you're just straight up upset that they replaced him, period, you were gonna have that same upset at some point in the next 5 years.
Perhaps, yeah.
I compare it to the Nelson Cruz thing. We would always say every offseason, let's re-sign Nelson Cruz. But at some point, Nelson Cruz is going to cease being Nelson Cruz. At some point, you were going to move on from Dick Bremer. And if there had been a sense that, okay, we're going to give him one final year, or maybe he scales back, he does only home games or something like that. But I don't think there was that sense. And so from their standpoint, they want a new voice. And if it's just open-ended, if there's no sense that, well, a 41st year will do it, then he'll be happy to step aside. Or a 42nd, it was just open-ended. And so they had to rip the Band-Aid off at some point because they wanted a change. And you can debate the merits of that and how it happened. But I do think that my hope is that Corey Provis is the choice to replace him. I think that's very possible. And I think he would be excellent. I think he's great at the job. I think he's a different approach than Dick Bremer, while also having a lot of the same old school announcer sensibilities and voice.
But he certainly has the relationships.
He has the relationships with players. I've watched him work his ass off, being in managers' meetings and working that clubhouse to get information that he conveys on the show. I think he would be awesome talking to Morneau and Perkins and Plouffe and whatever younger color commentators they had. And ultimately, I think Corey Provis, 30 years from now, we'll be dead, but could be having a conversation about, when's the time to have Corey Provis step down? He's done a great job for 35 years or whatever. And that's kind of, I think, their goal. You can't have the next guy who can do a multi-decade run as the voice of the Twins if the current guy is still in that job. And I think that's the logical component versus the emotional component, similar to the payroll discussion that we had. And you're never going to convince everyone on either side of those things. But that's sort of how I've come to think of the situation.
I'll say I agree with a couple of your points. I agree with that that the Twins have every right to make a change, and sooner or later that a change is going to happen. We all have to just be willing to accept that, including by the way, Bremer, right?
Right.
I also agree. We can be frustrated with the way it went down, but how that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be angry at the Twins. It just needs to be you can be disappointed that the two sides couldn't figure out a better, more smoother, more respectful way for the whole thing to and celebratory way for the whole thing to end. Right. And I don't know how much of that is to do with one side versus how much of that has to do with one side. The other side, I'm not sure we're ever going to know. Right.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I would argue about the necessity of making. Eventually a move is going to need to be made. Like I said, I thought Bremer was at the top of his game right now. I think he has earned a level of respect over those 40 years. I think he has earned a level of connection with Twins fans over those 40 years. And I think he has been, that's funny that they're going to name him a special ambassador of the Twins. He's already been the most special ambassador for the Twins, right? He has not only represented them on the air for 40 years, he has represented them at various functions throughout there. He's represented them on the Twins Caravan, etc.
No, he's the voice of the Twins in more ways than one.
It's one thing to say, listen, sooner or later it needs to be made. I don't know why that move needed to be made now. Maybe there's something going on that
we know it's the same as the payroll,
but potentially
they're changing everything about the broadcast. I think it presents.
I might suggest that might be one. If you're going to make that transition, maybe you keep something the same. During that transition.
To me, you're already starting. If you're going from broadcast television to streaming under the MLB TV umbrella. I mean, if not now, with a change for a 40-year announcer, when? And by the way, don't you want, if it's Corey Provis, don't you want to give him a chance to start with that clean slate and not jump in on year 3 of that, like to be on the ground floor of the big change that's happening, bigger picture with the broadcast? I think
it might also be that 3 years from now the transition is a smoother transition. Maybe both sides tend to see a closer eye to eye on that. It could be worse.
By the way,
it could be worse.
3 years from now, the person, whether it's Corey Provis or someone else that you think would be the best choice,
could be gone. Yeah,
that's a risky run too. You're not going to sit around forever and wait for a job that's not going to open up ever. Yeah. A couple other things. My hope is, you kind of touched on this, but that the way this ended, I mean, first of all, 6 months from now, Dick Bremer might be at the ballpark doing something. He might be on the air doing something. All this stuff can change in a hurry. Just the fact that nobody's heard a lot from him in the days after it is not a surprise. But my hope is that the way this ended and the emotions involved don't take away from how incredible it is to have a 40-year run like this and to establish yourself as all the things you just said, which is sort of the connection that a lot of Twins fans have had as the only connection in their lifetime. He started the year I was born in. I'm old as hell. And so he is the voice. And by the way, he's missed like 10 games in 40 years. So like he is quite literally the play-by-play voice that people have only heard if they're the Twins. And my hope is that whatever you thought of him and the job he's done and the connections he's made and the legacy that he had built, that it doesn't become diminished, and if anything becomes even elevated, given the suddenness and the less than ideal way that it ended. Yeah. We don't know that. I mean, we'll see how it plays out.
Right.
But that's kind of my hope for this thing, is that like he's already probably not thrilled with how it went, and I know how important all that stuff is to him as an ambassador to the Twins and everything. And I hope that he will actually fulfill that special assistant role and do some of the things that he was so good at, being the MC of things and all that. And so that he can still keep alive that connection for his sake, but also for a fan's sake. Because, I mean, there is no way to slice it other than 40 years as the lead announcer for a Major League Baseball team is absolutely incredible. There's been no controversies. There's been no long absences. There's been no, what happened to Bremer? He's really lost his fast. I mean, it's remarkable to do 40 years of that, no matter how it ended. And I think that's what I keep coming back to a little bit. But, all right. Well, there's our little Dick Bremer discussion. We talked a lot more about it on the Patreon site. You're probably starting to get the sense that I think you should sign up for the Patreon.
We will be back with another free episode. We probably should have started the pod with this. We're in 2 weeks. Because I'm going away. I'm going abroad.
We're having John committed finally.
That's right. Sometime next week, I think we will do a mailbag on the Patreon. So if you
depending on the Wi-Fi connection from Sweden,
that's exactly right, from Stockholm.
Yeah.
You might want to check out Patreon next week. I would suggest signing up for it beforehand because that way you can actually submit questions to our mailbag.
Anything that fell through the cracks here, or any follow-up questions that you have on the wide variety of topics that we've hit here, send in a question. I mean, there's a decent chance.
Otherwise, the chance for the next free episode is probably the day before Thanksgiving. The Wednesday morning is when we are planning for that. Planning for that to drop. By then, we may have some more free agent news. We might have some more payroll news. We will definitely have non-tender news on Kyle Farmer, one way or the other. Either he will be out of arbitration or not.
Murdered sort of suspiciously for my payroll-related comments. By then.
That's right.
Who knows? Case might already be a closed case.
It might be,
or an open case.
That's right.
Maybe John's under
open
suspicion.
Casket.
It does provide It does provide a very ample opportunity for you to finally kill me and have it blamed on these comments on the payroll.
I could say I was in Stockholm.
That's right.
As far as you know.
Yeah. This is a photoshopped picture of you at some bar in Stockholm. No, here's the thing about you. You couldn't stay out of public sight here for more than an hour and a half.
That's probably true.
I could do it.
That's probably true.
I could say I was, but nobody would believe I was
I
in
could
Stockholm.
absolutely get a bar full of people thanking you for buying them drinks in Stockholm,
right?
Even if I wasn't there.
But it's going 2 weeks without someone seeing you at whatever O'Donovan's or whatever, or whatever brewery. Finnegan's. Sorry, wrong Irish. But O'Donovan's works too. All right, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Gleeman